Hi.
Hello.
Welcome everyone to another NextTribe virtual event. As a lot of you know who've been to some of our events during the spring, we love to bring these accomplished women together and let you get up close and personal with them and find out what makes their minds work. And we have two fascinating women with us today. And if everybody, let me just explain how it will work. If you can mute yourself, and if you have questions, we'll have time for questions, and you'll just write your question in the chat, and then when it's your turn, I'll ask you to unmute yourself so you can ask Muffie or Erica directly. So that's how we roll here. So the book we're talking about is One Last Lunch. And this was the brainchild of Erica Heller, and she got all kinds of cool people to be writing for her about an imagined last lunch that was somebody they've loved or admired. And it's such a great concept, because don't we all have somebody in our lives, if we just had one more time, what we would be able to say to them. And Erica is the author of the memoir, Yossarian Slept Here, the novel Splinters and 300 Ways to Say No to a Man, a humor book illustrated by Seymour Chast. She has contributed to the New York Observer, Huffington Post, and other publications. Welcome, Erica.
Hello. Good to be here.
Great to have you here. And then Muffie Meyer is a filmmaker, and she's best known, maybe that's not fair, but we know her as the co-director of the fabulous documentary Grey Gardens, and which I think was one of your first projects, but you can correct me.
An early one, yeah.
And then she's gone on to produce and direct other series, specifically those focusing on American history, colonial history. And I'm told she's a great cook too. So. But Muffie has an essay in this book about an imagined last lunch with little Edie Beale. So we'll be asking her about that. So let's start off, Erica. I wanted to start off because you're the one who thought of this. What prompted you to create this book and get all these writers together?
Sheer madness. I think it's, when I look back now, I think it must have been lunacy. What prompted it was, I lost my mother about 25 years ago, and I still miss her. I still know what she would say about stupid things that I do. I can hear her voice. And I was just thinking about if only I could have one more lunch with her. Nothing would be that different probably, but just to have the luxury of her company again and listen to her laugh and criticize me. And we would bicker, and then we would make up, and then hopefully we'd go shopping. And I just kept thinking about that. And I was wondering if other people had people like that too. Right. And everybody does, as it turns out.
And did you first approach a publisher about it, or did you start talking to some of your friends and asking them if they had somebody they'd want to write about?
You know, I think I've blocked a lot of it out. It was traumatic. I think I had the idea. Someone steered me to the most wonderful agent, Lori Fox, who, believe it or not, believed in this thing. And, you know, then it was a question of getting people willing to do this. And what the process was, I made lists of people I would like to have lunches with in the book. Then I had to find somebody who knew them.
Oh, so you worked that direction.
That way. And so in the beginning, for some reason, it was very easy. I got Steve Jobs and I think Robin Williams and one other. And I couldn't believe it because I really didn't think anybody would do this.
some of these, you have James Baldwin, you have Saul Bellow, David Bowie, Nora Ephron, Groucho Marx, Julia Child, Jackie O, all kinds of great people who, and that you wanted to have somebody talk about it, and then you found the person who knew
I
that.
thought they would be interesting, but in many cases, in most cases, I had to go through so many people to get to, you know, I would wake up every day and write 100 emails
Oh my God.
to
Wow.
agents, and I don't know what possessed me. I went into some zone of tenacity that I hope I never am in again. But, you know, it was a question of finding people, then convincing them in many instances. And there was a lot of begging, I'll admit. There was negotiating, and a lot of people were nervous. They wanted help with theirs. And a lot of people weren't writers and were concerned about what they would produce, as was I, because in the middle of this, as people were signing on, it occurred to me, what if these people can't write? It's very nice that they knew these people, but how do I know what they're going to come up with? And I was very, very lucky. Most things could be worked with,
Oh,
and many weren't touched at all. But to get to each person was quite a trip.
okay. And so Muffie, you knew Muffie before. You guys live in the same building, from what I understand.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what did she say to you? How'd she get you in on this?
She told me early on of her idea for the book, and you know, if she got it going, would I be willing? And I said, I'm not a writer. You know, she said, I'll help you. And so, you know, I kind of didn't think it would really happen, so I said yes. And then suddenly it was a reality. And so I wrote something, and Erica wrote, you know, a page of suggestions. And I wrote something, you know, I took her suggestions because I'm not a writer. And I took her suggestions. A lot of it had to do with add more detail, add more detail. What did the restaurant look like? What did, you know, what did it smell like? That kind of thing. And some of it was, you know, little Edie talks in this very stream of thought, non sequitur sort of way in reality. Oh, I have to confess, the other thing I had was a whole trove of, I never would have done this had I not had a whole trove of letters from little Edie, which I could crib from. So I had her voice. So pretty much everything she says to me at that lunch, she wrote.
Oh, that's good info. That's a great little thing, right?
Yeah, and she has this very non sequitur way of talking. So I remember one of the things Erica said quite late on, when I insisted this is how Edie talks, we've got to keep this, is to tell people, you know, don't worry that it doesn't make total logical sense. Just say Edie spoke in her usual way of speaking in non sequiturs.
Right,
And
right.
you know, little suggestions like that. So it was incredibly helpful. So I credit Erica, you know, 50% for my story.
Oh, good. I will get.
Edie gets the other 50.
You're too humble. So Erica, very interesting, and I didn't say this in advance, but I put it in the info on the promo about the piece, about the event. But your father is Joseph Heller of Catch 22, which, you know, is part of the lexicon, of course. And you wrote about him twice for
Right.
and it was very moving. You open the book and you close the book, with these two different essays about Imagine Lunches with Your Dad. Can you tell us a little bit about how you came to do those two?
I don't know if I can, because I'm not really sure. I wrote the first one as a fantasy, a very happy, wonderful lunch. And I think as I watched people reveal more and more about themselves and their relationships, and I saw how honest everyone was and really raw in certain places. Hello?
Oh, no, it's fine.
I realized I had to be more honest with it myself and really go there and talk about what a lunch really would be like. And so it turned out that one was fantasy and one was much more reality based.
So can you just tell us then about your relationship with your father? Because that, you know, especially the second one, that becomes very apparent and you know, like made me clench my fist at a couple of points. But
Sorry.
no, not about you, but just like, but
There's not that much to say. As I think I said in my lunch, I don't think we liked each other very much. I mean, I think it may have just simply been that he told me my whole life that relatives didn't have to necessarily like each other. And I think really at the end of the day, that's what it was. We were never gonna be friends. And as he said at one point, I don't do kids, I don't do children. And yet he was a father, and it was a difficult relationship. I was very lucky to have a very supportive, loving mother.
Right. And do you did you ever talk about writing or any of that, or
With my father, I did a bit, and then I learned very quickly not to. He was, I mean, I know this sounds demented, but he was very competitive, even with his children.
wow.
And if I would show him something I had written for school, it would come back covered in red with what I should have done, what I could have done. This is wrong. Check this fact, check that fact. And he really, he was not generous in spirit that way. I've been told with his writing students that he was, and that's great for them. I'm delighted,
Yeah.
but I didn't find him to be supportive, so we really didn't talk about writing.
But good for you that you kept going and pushing as a writer. You know, you didn't let that stop you from writing.
Okay.
Because you've written a novel, you've written books, or maybe I should ask, how did it affect your career? Because you've had other, you know, you worked in advertising, right? So did you have
a long time I was a copywriter, yes.
So maybe did you choose not to go do as much in the literary world and more in the advertising world because of his standoffishness, or to be?
I don't think he really, I think it was very simply that that's all I could do, really. This is what I can do. Muffie can cook, believe me, I cannot. And I could write, and I wrote in advertising. I didn't especially love it after a while. And I think it started, I wrote an op-ed piece for the New York Times at my first advertising job. And it was a great feeling to be in the New York Times. It was wonderful. And it was only for one day, but it was a great day.
And what was it about?
Oh, God. It was about the Vietnam War and how the country had let the young people down and not to expect us to be not supportive of us after something like that. And they published it. They gave me $25. I bought a bicycle. I was queen of the world. And I enjoyed writing. And it was never easy. I mean, some people say it is. Like, I want to have their psychiatrist because I can't imagine it, but I learned that in some way I enjoyed it and I could do it. And so it just sort of went that way.
Yes. Well, and Muffy, I know people are interested about your experience. We can talk a little bit about the story you wrote about little Edie Beale, but I also am curious, how you got involved with Grey Gardens. Let's start there, your background with that film.
So I was in my 20s and had been working in documentaries for a while. I was one of the editors on the film Woodstock, sort of right out of school. And I came over to the Maisels at a certain point and did a few music films. And then they had, went away back. It's a freelance business, so you work for people and then you go work for other people, et cetera. So I went to work for somebody else, and David Maisels called up and said they had this project. So I went over to the Maisels, and Ellen Hovde and I started working on it. And we were given, I don't know, what I remember is 160 hours of film that they had shot over 6 weeks. And it was very hard because, in a film, especially, one that was supposed to be theatrically released and everything, you take the stuff of life, but you have to create a fictional beginning, middle, climax, and end. And the problem with the Beales was that every day was like every other day. They sang, they fought, they resolved their fight, and they sang some more. Little Edie would dance, and every single day was like that. So
and you were editing at this point. You were editing.
That's what I was doing, is editing, with aspirations to direct. And the Maisels, more or less, Albert left us completely alone, and David would pop into the editing room every now and again. And Ellen and I and another person, Susan, worked on the film literally for 2 years, trying to find how to structure the film. And since there was no real kind of beginning, middle, and end, what we had to do was structure it in such a way that rather than the change happening with the Beales, because they didn't change, we had to change how the audience felt about them. So in the beginning, as they're fighting and everything. So the question, for those of you who haven't seen it, the thing is that little Edie, the daughter, was the most beautiful debutante of her year. She was, her cousins, Jackie, the person who became Jackie Kennedy Onassis, and Lee Radziwill, looked up to her. She was gorgeous. She had a million suitors, and at a certain point in her 20s, she moved to New York briefly and then came home to live with her mother for the rest of her life. They were wealthy, upper class, Americans, and they had everything. And they ended up kind of semi-recluses. And so the question in the film is why? How did that happen? This beautiful, talented, intelligent, desirable young woman, how come she went and lived with her mother for the rest of her life? And so, what happens throughout the film is trying to help you to understand. And at first you think, oh, it's little Edie's fault. She just can't hack it, and she's flighty, and she's, has all sorts of issues. And then you start to realize that the mother is constantly needing her. And in the end, you kind of come to realize that it's a dependency relationship takes two people,
right,
being dependent on one another, and so that's kind of what happened.
And so, when you were working on it, editing it, did you have any thought that it would be the kind of classic it is considered now?
None whatsoever. I mean, we knew it was incredibly interesting, but no. And when it first came out, it was, a lot of people loved it, but it was really criticized. A lot of people A lot of people hated it. They thought we were exploiting them. They thought that Edie was crazy and had no right to sign her own release, you know, and all sorts of stuff. So no, I think it was the fact that it was taken up by the gay community was really what at least began its long life.
Right. Because now it's had a stage play and a movie.
And a movie, yeah.
It really had, and but you became friends with little Edie Beale, or?
I did. She sang at my wedding.
Oh my gosh, that is amazing.
Yeah.
So, but you're listed as a co-director also. Did you ever get behind the camera with them?
No, but in that we were responsible for the structuring of for turning a lot of amazing footage into an actual film was what you know, earned us the director credit, really. In a documentary, shooting the film is part of it, and then structuring it is a huge part of it.
I see. And but when did you have when did you
meet little Edie?
Yeah.
My Susan, who also worked on the film, and I were very close friends, and she had a house in East Hampton. So I used to go out there on weekends, and we would ride our bikes over to Grey Gardens and go visit little Edie. And occasionally she would come to our house for dinner and stuff like that.
Oh my gosh.
So
when you wrote this, you were telling us that a lot of the things that were said in your imagined lunch with her, what did you want when people finished reading it? Did you want them to just know more about her, that she was, or what did you want people to know about her or think about her after they'd read it? Did you have a goal?
I think the thing that I most wanted was to capture her voice, which is why I used her letters. But I also, in the film, because they only once does little Edie leave her house to go to the beach, which is like, 20 steps from her house. You had this sense of them being very insular. And one of the only fight we had on the film with the Maisels was with David. There was this wonderful scene in the film that didn't make it into the film, but was in the film up until the very end, where little Edie is in the second story window leaning out and yelling a diatribe against Richard Nixon. And Ellen and I really, really wanted it in the film because it showed that she was engaged with the world. And David really didn't want it in the film because he thought it would date the film. And, it was their money and they won. And I've often wondered, from time to time, I still come back to wondering who was right. Sometimes I think he was right. And sometimes I think, we were right. So part of what I wanted to show in the film, it was that little bit of engagement with the world, which you get at the end, where she, talks about that wretched Richard Nixon, and we'll never have a president that's as bad as that again. So, yeah. And just to get a sense of Edie, and all of us on the film, Edie talked constantly about men, and constantly was flirting with the Maisels, and clearly had a complicated relationship, both with her father and with men, none of which she talked about in any kind of depth. And every time you asked her, she'd evade. So we wanted to know, had she ever had sex, and had she, what had happened with these relationships that she says, the people that she says she was engaged to, and so on. We never got an answer. We never got a straight answer about a lot of stuff with her. So also I sort of, within my lunch, I was thinking, well, maybe I'll ask her, maybe again, I'll try and press her again. And once again, of course, she evaded.
So you did actually capture that part of her. I just want to remind people that everyone's welcome to ask questions, and we're going to open it up soon for questions, but you can just type those questions in chat, and then I'll call on you and you can ask them directly yourself. We don't have to go through me to ask them. I want to go back to to Erica. Tell me about your, like, which of these stories that came in were the most surprising?
You think I'm going to tell you that? And which were my favorites?
Yeah, I'd love to. I was getting that way.
No. They were all surprising. I mean, I didn't know hardly anything about most of these people, about their private lives. So every little nugget was surprising. You know, that James Baldwin lived in Italy and wore no socks, and everything was amazing to me to learn about everybody.
Right, and everybody had met their people that they, except the one who wrote about Jesus.
Well, he would have a different answer for that. He, I think, feels that he did meet him.
I feel, I mean, I haven't read every essay, but it's definitely the kind of thing you pick up, and you just have a little bit of time, you can pick one and just and really enjoy it. And of course, I did read the one on Nora Ephron because Jesse Kornbluth published it. He wrote it. He's a very well-known writer in New York, and he wrote about her, and we published it in NextTribe. So, and there was a little bit of people, a couple comments of like, I don't think this is fair, making up something about somebody, making up her conversation, but I think they just didn't get didn't understand the spirit of it. The spirit of it was, just it was imagined, and it was clearly imagined. I guess they thought maybe
it was all about imagination and people letting themselves go. I mean, Prince flies out of the Beverly Hills Hotel, literally flying. People, whatever they wanted, they had to somehow summon these people, and everyone had a different way.
Right.
And the people had to go back to wherever they were or disappear or something. It had to end.
Right.
And it's all imagination.
And it's like some people wrote it. I know one, I can't remember who, wrote it as a kind of a screenplay.
Lula Bankhead.
Yeah.
And her
and what other, did you have any other parameters? I mean, because the ones I've read, they've all, the subject of the lunch all acknowledges that they're dead. I mean, it's part, right?
Don't seem to care that they're dead. Also, but the parameters, as Muffie said, I just wanted detail. I wanted it to be like we were at the next table eavesdropping.
Yeah.
And we could see the pickles on the table. We could see the ice cream melting in the bowl. And I wanted it to feel like we were really there.
Right.
And the ones that actually did that, to me, were the most moving.
Mm. And most of the ones I've read, there's a bittersweet quality about all of them. I mean, the ones I've read, of course, there's others that I haven't gotten to, but would you say that was probably the predominant kind of tone? Is that bittersweet?
Well, I mean, I don't know. I mean, people had such complicated relationships that it's hard to really, they were not a homogenized collection.
Right.
But I think reading it is bittersweet because they're gone.
Yeah.
And these people still have feelings for them. And I think it was Robert Benchley who said, death ends a life, not a relationship. I'm probably mangling that, but something like that. He said it better. But it's really true that these relationships go on long after people have left us. And we're left to process everything however we do. And in some cases, you know, like there's a lunch with Kate O'Toole with her father, Peter O'Toole. And it's just fun. It's just absolute fun. No, nothing is sad. It's very classy. And you know how much they loved each other. And then there are some that are very sad, I think. And you can feel somebody's pain that they're missing this person, but they're all different. And
beautiful.
And some are very complicated. You know, you can sense the complicated relationship in them. The thing that struck me about reading them is how, even though they're fantasies, they all had the ring of truth. They all had the sense of, you got a real sense of what the dead person was like, and you got a real sense of what the relationships were like.
Right, yes. Like I guess, you know, Peter O'Toole and his daughter must have had a pretty joyous or happy relationship. Is it
right.
reflective in it? So we've got a few questions. I'm going to ask Fran to unmute herself, Fran Carpentier, to ask her question.
Erica, first, thank you so much for sharing with us. But I was just curious, like, is there someone or several people who like got away? Like someone you reached out to and didn't participate?
Yeah.
If you gave them the manuscript, were you like, oh, I should have asked so-and-so?
Oh, yes. They were my white whales.
Did you name one or two?
I wanted Mike Nichols.
Right.
I wanted Elizabeth Taylor. I wanted
Rosemary Clooney.
Rosemary Clooney.
I was Clooney, right?
I was hoping her nephew might throw together a few words. That's real fantasy. But yeah, there were some that you just could not, you know, for one reason or another. I wanted Marilyn Monroe, you know, and there were people who knew her, but for one reason or another, getting Jackie Onassis was something that I felt was absolutely impossible. And I went through so many people. And as it turned out in the end, right near the end, Muffie had worked with and was friends with the woman who Jackie had worked for at Doubleday as an editor.
Yeah.
She was willing to do it, and it worked out beautifully, but I didn't get it. I didn't expect to get Jackie. I mean,
and were some people just didn't want to do it or whatever because they're very private about their connection to that person, or
some people didn't want to do it because they weren't getting paid.
oh well.
Very basic, which I could relate to, certainly. I mean, I'm amazed really that most of these people did it. They worked really hard, and I think for some of them it was very painful. For some of them it was fun.
But maybe cathartic as well, right? For some, that, I mean, you sit down.
It was interesting because people kept asking me if it was that. In my case, and it wasn't at all. It was just spending more time with someone who was difficult. And so there was nothing. The cathartic part was ending the lunch and getting up and going home. But for some people, like there's a writer who, strangely enough, also lives in our building, Phyllis Rayfield, who's a wonderful writer. And she wrote about her grandson, Max, who died when he was 6. And I knew that was going to be agony for her, but she did it, and so beautifully. And people just came through. I mean, I'll never know why.
Well, I'm sure you were a good, inspiring leader. That's what it takes, is somebody who has.
I was desperate. I mean, I had a book contract and I had to find somebody. And, you know, there were surprisingly people there were more lunches than are in the book. We couldn't even use all of them.
Okay, well now we need to know something about that. Who are we not reading about?
Well, that's sort of telling you that people were bad writers.
Oh, okay. I was gonna say, of course, I'm just trying to get that.
I know. I know.
We have a question from Tammy. Tammy, can you unmute yourself?
Yes, I haven't read the book yet, but wow. So brava, Erica and Muffie. I'm a huge Grey Gardens fan. So that was my draw, being honest today. But I had no idea about the book, Erica. And for those of us that have lost both parents, I think it's I love writing. It's therapeutic to me. I blog the hell out of all my family deaths or whatever, just in a personal blog. But I think this is a really nice and inspirational personal blog to do for self as an exercise with both parents, because it was difficult, both parents. So I'm excited to read the book, but my question was, like, I can't wait to read the book, but will you do, what the book's name is, One Last Lunch, The Last Call? Would you?
That's a good idea.
I'll never say no, but.
Well, I mean, think of those that have died, since you've written the first book. What year was the first book?
Which first book?
I mean, the One Last Lunch.
The lunch.
It just came out, but you've been working on it for years, right?
Like 2 years.
So if you took the next 5 years and included those, that will have passed or whatever, I don't know. I think it would be a neat second book.
Write the proposal. It's my own.
I
think it sounds extraordinary. I look forward to reading it.
Thank you.
It is extraordinary. Barb Richardson wanted me to ask you, Muffie, if you were around for that summer as well.
I know all about it, but I wasn't. Ellen, so what happened with that summer so here's how the Maisels met the Beales. Lee Radziwill wanted to make a film about her childhood and her family, and she hired the Maisels to film her wandering around East Hampton. I went to the beach here, and I played here, and this is my aunt and cousin. And the Maisels and Ellen edited that film. And the cousins were far more the most interesting thing that they filmed. So they occupied the greater part of the hour or so that film was. And when Lee saw it, she wasn't at all happy with that result. So she and her boyfriend at the time, Peter Beard, took that film and went home. And that was 1974, 73, 74. And bits of it reemerged. A fair number of bits from it reemerged in Peter Beard's film The Last Summer.
Oh, okay, that's so interesting. Of course, because Peter Beard just recently died under pretty tragic the way he died. So interesting. I did not know about that.
Yeah, and he sort of turned it to himself. It ceased to be about Lee, and it became about him and his,
Poor Lee. She was.
I know.
About the Beales, and then she wants a film about her. It's about Peter Beard.
Yeah.
And there's her sister's Jackie O. This is like a really hard life.
Yeah.
So let's see. We have other questions from. I can't read because I love it. Sybil Sage. Do you want to unmute yourself?
I don't know where I am here. Oh, I'm muted.
Yes, we can hear you.
You can hear me? Okay, I just was wondering why Erica chose lunch and not dinner.
Good question.
Lunch, to me, seemed to have a beginning, a middle, and an end. At least to me. Dinners could just go on forever. And it just, for some reason, it seemed less possible to have as much variation with dinner as lunch. Dinner just seems more serious, and I wanted this open to anything. And it's a good question, but it's weird. I never considered dinner.
Well, and I like that the alliteration. So there, that's probably it, right? One last lunch.
The title was, what was it? Late Lunches.
Yeah.
And the publisher decided that was too depressing. But this one was, we were all happy with.
Yeah, that's
After a million little efforts at other titles.
And actually, I don't know if I even read the subtitle, which is A Final Meal with Those Who Meant So Much to Us. And I like the idea, Tammy, that you suggested of it being a writing. I mean, for anybody, it could be a writing exercise of like really kind of to come to terms with what that person meant to you. And after going through this, do you have any like words of wisdom about how we should be in our, I mean, to me, it's like, maybe we should make sure that we've said everything we need to say. I mean, I know you can't tell when people you're going to lose people, but it just makes.
That is one of the things I came away from it with. I was not aware of it at the time, but when it was finished, my mother was sick for a year and a half, and I took care of her before she died. And it was sort of like one long conversation. And my father was different. I got a call in the middle of the night, and we didn't have a chance to say anything. So I know both of those situations, and I think it's very important while someone is still there that you let them know what they mean to you and try to resolve, if you can, whatever problems have been there. I think it's important, because then it's too late. You know, one day it's just, and it's like, what if? And you don't want to live with what if for the rest of your life. So.
Well, I have to just say personally, my father died about 2.5 years ago, but he decided he didn't want to be operated he was 88. And I remember sitting with him and saying to him, so if you were to die tomorrow, you're okay with it? And he goes, I'm absolutely okay. I've had such a great life. I'd be so happy to, blah, blah, blah. That in itself has made so much difference in the way I reacted when he finally did die. So I mean, when you were talking about it, I was thinking how happy I was that I had sort of that kind of a conversation.
Right.
And Sarah Guillory, you have a question. You want to unmute yourself?
Hi, Sarah.
Hi, Sarah.
I just wanted to say that I was struck when Norman Mailer's daughter wrote that she imagined how life would be different if her father hadn't stabbed her mother with a penknife on that particular occasion that he did, that if they had just gone to the party and that hadn't happened. To me, that was a very poignant moment. Did that have the same effect on you, that she thinks about that? What if her father hadn't stabbed her mother that particular night at that party?
Me?
Yeah. Did it strike you as very poignant that
I just felt that it had to be an important thing in her life with him.
Yeah.
And it was just a question of whether she was going to be honest about it or not and avoid it or not. And I was very glad that she talked about it. I mean, how could you not be thinking about it?
She just put it, I thought she put it in a very touching way.
Yes.
That, that never happened to me, so it isn't something I think about, like, that she would always be thinking about that. What if he just didn't have a knife on him that night? Whatever it was, if they hadn't gotten that drunk or whatever it was, that struck me when I was reading it.
And Robin, I don't know how to pronounce your last name, Bobbe. You wanted to say something, and if you want to unmute yourself, Robin, if you're still.
Yeah, no, it's Bobbe.
Babe, sorry.
Oh, thank you. No, Dan Allen Tuck is a good friend. And I was just really, thank you, Erica. I thought his piece on Maureen Stapleton was just beautiful, heartbreaking. You know,
It was really her. He really.
It was, yes, and you know, his voice. You know, Danny's so funny.
Yes.
And and it really comes through. So thank you for that.
Yes.
That was one of my favorites too.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's so many great. I mean, just Eudora Welty. I mean, there's so many great ones. Richard Pryor. I mean, there's Paul Newman. I mean, there's so many great people you have. So you did such a great job in getting all these people together. And
No wonder I'm exhausted.
so we're coming towards the end. If there's anybody else that wants to ask something before we go, I mean, you have somebody who's been in the head, kind of. She's had lunch with a lot of people. Should we say that's the question? But I also wanted to remind everyone that, you know, if you don't know what NextTribe is, I'll just do a quick little plug. We're a digital magazine and community for smart, engaged women over 45. And we do trips and live events. Well, those two things, not recently, but we do publish articles by great writers from all over the country. And we've been doing more of these virtual events, and I would invite you to become a member because that helps us do all these things, and you get special perks as a member. So I'm going to just type in the little membership thing in the chat if anybody's interested. And other than that, please get the book because it's fascinating. As I said, you just start reading one, and you know the phone rings, and you go back and read another one. It's a great way to get into so much of our recent popular culture and literary culture with all the people you got. So I'm very impressed.
Thank you.
One last thing I'd love to add, Jeannie, is thank you. I've followed Jeannie since the beginning of her efforts with NextTribe, and every time I have time to pop in, it's the most eclectic, amazing women that you've gathered. And I don't even feel like I'm supposed to have a seat in the room. So thank you. I'm so amazed at having access to this. And I can't wait to read the book and tell everyone, I met the author.
And in 2 weeks, we'll have Amy Ferris, who is just a pistol. She's just an amazing writer. And also Marta Kaufman, who created Friends and Grace and Frankie. So they're going to talk about friendships and their friendships in this environment, you know, how important it is, how it sustains us in the pandemic and so forth. So we'll be speaking about that kind of thing. We'll get to ask her about, you know, how she thought of Friends and about the vibrator business on Grace and Frankie, you know, all these things. So, Patrice says, I think Eric and I met as children. Oh my God.
What is it?
Patrice, you could say that.
Yeah, my father was part of the Catch-22 group, that whole New York, Brooklyn Jewish intellectual guys with Mel Brooks, your dad, George Mandel, does that name ring?
Oh, yes.
So they were really good friends of my dad. So you and I were the same age. Children.
What was your father's name?
Roy Roisman. Yeah, we used to go over to George Mandel's house a lot. What was he, like on Riverside Drive? And like,
yeah, he's quite a character.
He was indeed. Like, I still have all of his books. But the question I had was, what was the year that the first Last Lunch interview kind of lunch was, and when the last one was for the book? I haven't read the book yet, but I want to. Because these are people who are not around anymore, and some of the people are still around. But I guess I'll have to read the book. That'll give me the answer.
Yeah.
All the subjects have passed away, but the writers then are here with us. So anyway.
And Muffie, East Hampton was the place to hang out in the 70s. That's
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, everyone, you're going to order this because you'll love it, and it'll be a great gift. Also, maybe a gift for somebody who's trying to resolve issues with someone they've lost. I don't know. It's just it's got a lot to it. So
It's also great summer reading because each chapter is short. It's like a 5-10 minute read.
Yes,
So.
I agree. It's good. It's good for all of that. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Erica and Muffie, for doing this. You were fabulous.
Another good book to read.
So much.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.